Hello everyone! This time I would like to talk about hyper-threading technology. Is it a good or a bad thing for games? Just a few years ago, additional threads usually were an overkill for almost every game except maybe one or two like Crysis 3 or Assassin's Creed Unity. But nowadays many of modern games support hyper-threading and it actually makes gameplay smoother by increasing average and minimal frame rate. I want to show you how hyper-threading can change your gaming experience by the example of 3 games. The first one is the latest Far Cry series game, New Dawn. This game's engine is based on old DirectX 11 API. On the right side of the screen, hyper-threading is disabled, on the left side it is enabled. As you can see, looking at each thread loading percentage indication, the game engine Dunia simply cannot load all of the 8 existing CPU threads. But look at the right side of the screen, all of the 4 threads are loaded by 85 to 95%. This means that this particular game engine in cooperation with DX11 simply do not see 4 additional threads. It cannot use them properly. Thus, the game performance with enabled hyper-threading is slightly worse. Hyper-threading lowers current frame rate by 5%, and it's also expressed in the actual gameplay through the absence of freezes, which rarely happen when all 8 threads are active. X3470 is an old CPU, so you will get some stutters here and there. But when hyper-threading is disabled, there are no freezes at all. So, all in all, in this case you get a little bit better performance when hyper-threading is disabled. Wait a minute, why do I say hyper-threading is a useful feature then? As I told you earlier, engines of old games simply cannot use additional threads. Dunia engine is actually an old engine, created in 2008. It was modified through the years of its life cycle from one game to the other. But it never received an update which would allow it to benefit from hyper-threading. That's sad, but this is just what it is. Let's get to the second game. It's Assassin's Creed Odyssey. This one is based on a quite modern game engine, Anvil Next 2, and again DX11 API. This time hyper-threading technology provides not only performance boost, but reduction of loading times as well. 14 seconds less to load benchmark run. As you can see, this game responds positively to the 4 additional threads. The difference in current frame rate is not big, but still quite significant, though inconsistent. The problem is that the difference in minimal frame rate is almost negligible. It means that 4 additional threads were only partly utilized. But still, this game shows us that hyper-threading is particularly relevant in 2 regards, as it simply helps CPU to operate more effectively. The third game is Shadow of the Tomb Raider, the latest game in the series. This one, unlike New Dawn, based on a quite new Foundation engine and a new DX12 API. This engine can easily handle many cores, while DX12 helps it to distribute the load effectively over all available threads. And what do we see now? Hyper-threading made a big difference this time. The minimal frame rate was 40 frames per second with 4 threads and 50 frames per second with 8 threads. This is a difference of 25%. Now we're talking. The second benchmark scene is mostly GPU intensive, but you can still see that hyper-threading is useful. What happens now? Looks like 4-thread CPU simply struggles to load the next benchmark scene. So I had to pause the video on the left side of the screen and wait until CPU with disabled hyper-threading finishes loading. And I've been waiting for 44 seconds. The third scene again shows us a whopping 25% difference in minimal frame rate. This makes an actual gameplay a lot smoother, while controls feel much more responsive. During actual gameplay, 4 additional threads make this game so much better. Not only due to performance improvement, they also provide much shorter loading screens. Even this old Xeon X3470 CPU demonstrates decent performance level in games which are able to utilize hyper-threading properly. Here is the thing, many modern games use hyper-threading feature. These are like 95% of all games based on DX12 and Vulkan APIs, and about 50% of modern games based on old DX11 API. So just a fraction of modern games do not use hyper-threading. Besides Far Cry series, these are Just Cause series, Borderlands series, Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order and some others. But those are diminishing year by year, as DX12 and Vulkan become more and more popular among game developers. DX11 actually can provide performance improvement when hyper-threading is enabled, but its capabilities in CPU load distribution across threads are far less impressive than those of newer APIs. I personally hope that DX11 will eventually vanish, and that it will happen pretty soon. Even CPU core and thread load distribution is a key thing in making games become more and more technically advanced. So, the more cores, threads game engine can use, the better. Besides, old multi-core CPUs provide better performance too, which means that the more cores your CPU have, the longer it will live. It is a win-win situation for everyone, all PC users including gamers and all software developers too. Hope this video was helpful. Let me know in the comment section below what do you think about hyper-threading. If you are interested, check my two previous videos in which I explained what is the best CPU for LGA 1156 platform and how to overclock CPUs on this platform. Good luck and till next time!